is I'm going to spend a little bit of time today just kind of going over, what are we doing before a disaster, before a hurricane response? What are we doing during a disaster or hurricane response? And then go over a little bit of the predictions for the next, for this hurricane season, which we are fully now 10 days into. And what I wanted to start with is a lot of people think that the American Red Cross, when you think of a hurricane response, you think of, oh, like hurricane hits and the Red Cross is there. But what I really want to talk a little bit today about is what are we doing in all these different stages of a tropical system? Because I can tell you, we do a lot of work before landfall. In fact, sometimes we do a lot more work before landfall than after landfall, depending on a hurricane. So what we're seeing here is just the different types of stages in the tropical development, what those stages mean, and what are our actions. So I want to start with a tropical wave, which is a low pressure trough of persisting winds. And even when we hear tropical wave in the Red Cross, we're like, oh, that's not something we can surf on. That's something that we need to pay very close attention to. And we start monitoring that system, and we really start looking at forecast modeling to see what type of impacts might happen. We're already starting to talk to people like Charles. We're already starting to talk to other people in the lines of business to really ensure that we're getting ready for what the models might tell us is going to happen with this tropical wave. And then when we hear the word tropical disturbance, we're like, oh, no, that's a pretty big deal. And it's really just an organized thunderstorm system that's over the ocean. And in that particular case, we're monitoring again, we're looking at all the models, and we may even just as early as something becoming a tropical disturbance already start to kick off something called our H120 timeline, which is a 5-day out checklist of actions, decisions, and whatnot that we have to take 5 days before a storm hits. And the reason why we do those things so far out is because we need to ensure that we have the resources in theater, not only to support the evacuation phase of a hurricane response, but also to ensure that we have the resources in theater to make sure we can respond after landfall. Obviously, when we hear things like tropical depression, tropical storm, and hurricane, when it gets to that type of development, we're already fully in our H120 timeline. We're going through our checklist, and we're standing up our disaster relief operation. This is a very nice graph that shows the typical development of a tropical system. Typically, it starts with those waves off of the western coast of Africa, and it gets carried off by those northeast trade winds, turns into a tropical depression, turns into a tropical storm, and eventually may turn into a hurricane. And then it goes off and goes into Europe. This is actually nature's way of air conditioning itself. Think of it as a big air conditioner. It's taking all that heat from the Atlantic Ocean, and taking all that heat, storing it as moisture and energy, organizing itself and dumping it up into the cooler North Atlantic Ocean. It's actually super cool. And typically we get, as you can see here at this, you get 5, 7, 10 days before a storm hits for us to be able to do a lot of readiness actions. However, in recent years, Louisiana has seen a lot more storms develop in the Gulf of Mexico. When it develops in the Gulf of Mexico, they typically develop rapidly and they intensify rapidly. And this doesn't give us quite as much time as we traditionally had to move resources into theater and everything. So what we've had to do is we've had to work with our national headquarters before hurricane season even begins to start bringing supplies down, to start really identifying those key leadership positions that we might need to bring in, to start activating our workforce so that we can adjust to that compressed timeline that we're starting to see in recent years. When I think of a tropical system, the one thing that we really need to do at the American Red Cross is make sure that we understand the threats of a tropical system. And we really look at that ahead of time, because the Red Cross is more than just a symbol of hope, but it's also a symbol of safety. So when we're in the evacuation phase of a hurricane response or tropical storm response, we really need to understand and ensure that we're protecting that symbol of safety and ensuring that our clients that we are housing in our shelters are safe. The big thing that gets the most attention is the wind threat from a tropical system. In fact, that's how we rank hurricanes right now. But the lesser known ones that are a little bit more dangerous are the storm surge and the flooding. We also need to look at tornadoes as well. And those are the 4 primary threats that we're looking at ahead of time to make sure that our shelters that we do open, if a hurricane evacuation occurs, that those are safe for everybody. And then when you look at the statistics, it's kind of a shocker, but 75% of storm-related or hurricane-related fatalities actually come from water, 50% from storm surge, and 25% from rainfall. We also have 5% that come from wind and tornadoes. So that's why we really, really take these tropical threats seriously, and why we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources before hurricane season and before a storm to ensure that the hurricane evacuation shelters that we identify with our government partners are safe, so that when we put our symbol on there, that those residents are really going to be safe from the water, from the wind, from potential tornadoes and whatnot. Moving into kind of the evacuating parishes, right? So all those blue dots, you're looking at this map, you're like, whoa, that's a lot of dots, right? The blue dots there are actually going to be those parishes that typically, because of the threats that we just discussed, they're going to order some type of parish-wide evacuation or a partial evacuation. Obviously, it depends on the storm. Some parishes will order a full evacuation if it's a tropical storm. Some will wait for it to be a Category 3 or higher or major hurricane. But what we do is we look at those, and you can see that there's a lot of parishes that do some type of full parish evacuation. And because of the threats that a tropical storm has, they have to go north. So they go up to the North Shore, that purple area. They go up to central Louisiana, that green area. And they go as far north as Shreveport and Monroe, northern Louisiana. In addition, some actually go out of state to Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, where the state of Louisiana actually helps and assists with those types of evacuations. Because that's just how much the risk is in those blue parishes that evacuate. And the fascinating thing is when you look at it, and one of the challenges that we have is that 60% in a full coastal evacuation type of scenario where we have a big storm coming in and it's going to impact the whole coastline, 60% of all of the population in Louisiana could be under some type of evacuation order. And because of all those threats that we talked about, making sure that everybody's safe, they have to go north. But the North Louisiana, those receiving parishes, only account for 36% of the population. So just imagine that. You're sending 60% of the population up to places that are going to literally double overnight of just evacuees. And the infrastructure in the north is not necessarily built to have those. The schools are smaller in the northern Louisiana than necessarily in portions of southern Louisiana. They don't have the big superdomes. They don't have those big buildings that we typically use for to help shelter our clients. And because of that, we've actually had to work with our government partners to do more smaller buildings instead of those larger facilities that we might have in South Louisiana. So that's why they're spread out so far. And I actually have a really cool map of where hurricane evacuation shelters are. And you can see here, there's just tons of red and blue, green dots there. They're just everywhere. Up in Monroe, places like Ruston, places like Shreveport, Alexandria, Bunkie, Louisiana. We've had to really spread out our hurricane shelters to ensure that we have enough capacity for those people who are under evacuation orders. This particular map that we're looking at, I'm sure you're all distracted by the red, the blue, the yellow at the bottom there. And again, just to ensure that we're a symbol of safety, the Red Cross actually uses a storm surge modeling from the National Hurricane Center. What you're looking at here is called a MOM, and it's not like your parent mom. It's actually it's called a MOM, and it's called the maximum of maximums, which is a product that the National Hurricane Center uses to develop the worst case scenario that a storm surge could potentially occur. And when we are selecting and supporting hurricane evacuation shelters, one of the first things we do is we look and see, is it in the Category 4 maximums? Because we want to plan for the worst case scenario. We want to make sure really that our clients are safe. So we're going to look at that storm surge. And as we talked about, storm surge and freshwater flooding are some of the top contributors to fatalities. So we really need to make sure we're looking at that stuff when we're selecting hurricane evacuation shelters. We'll also take a look again at flooding planes. We took a look at wind ratings. We're looking at roof spans. We're looking at all these types of things. We're looking at proximity to nuclear power plants, just so we can make sure that when we are asked to open up these hurricane evacuation shelters, that they're safe. As you can tell, with all those threats and all those things that we have to consider, which is actually 41 pages of a shelter survey, that's the new shelter survey. We have to ask our volunteers and our staff and pour resources in that all year long so that we can check every single one of these hurricane evacuation shelters to make sure that they're not going to be putting people in harm's way, and that they really are adequate shelters for any type of event. So now that we've talked a lot about how we kind of get ready and the different type of readiness actions that we take every year, including this year, about looking at the threats and looking at the modeling and making sure that we understand the shelters that we're going to be doing. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the historic 2020 hurricane season. Looking at this, you can see that during the 2020 hurricane season, Louisiana was in the cone of air 6 times. That's historic. Louisiana has never been in a cone of air that many times any other year. And even though you're looking at this, we know that Cristobal made landfall. Marco kind of fizzled out before it made landfall, but it was pretty close. Laura made landfall, and Delta made landfall. And this is not even including Zeta, so it's actually 7. But you can see here we got Sally and Beta. Though those technically did not make landfall in Louisiana, the American Red Cross still stood up disaster relief operations to ensure that if they did make landfall, or if they did have some type of impacts in Louisiana, the citizens would be safe, and that we'd have the resources in theater to rapidly be able to respond. In fact, for Sally, we opened up several shelters on the North Shore because the government officials were unsure if the storm was going to make a last-minute jump to the west. For Beta, we were in talks with opening up some shelters for that because we were unsure of exactly what it was going to do in the end. So even though some hurricane or a storm might not make landfall in Louisiana, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Red Cross hasn't stood up some type of relief operation to ensure that if it did, we'd be ready. This is a cool little map that shows all the different hurricanes that have made landfall in Louisiana. You can see here Laura, Delta, Cristobal, Zeta, Marco. You can see Delta kind of fizzled out before it got there. Sally made one heck of a turn at the end there. And then, to be honest with you, there were so many hurricanes last year, I have to look at this map and be reminded, oh, wow, I totally forgot about those. But it really demonstrates just exactly just the intensity of last year and just how historic it was. And the really interesting thing is that Laura and Delta really, they made landfall 12 miles from each other, which is just so unfortunate, and something that, frankly, you don't see that often with hurricanes. 12 miles from one another, that's just crazy. Looking at this, this map is going to depict the detailed damage assessment that we do. And after disaster relief operation, after landfall, what we do is we send out these huge damage assessment teams. And they go out there and they take pictures and they do all these surveys and they mark things as destroyed, minor, affected, all types of things. And you can see here, it's pretty logical, right? You think, oh, like the damage is going to be around the path of the storm. And you can see last year with Marco, Laura, and Delta, a lot of the damage really was in southwest Louisiana. But the interesting thing, and the thing that I want to draw attention to, is if you look here at North Louisiana, you can see that we have major and destroyed homes as far north as Shreveport, as far north as Monroe. And that's really interesting because Laura was still a hurricane when it hit North Louisiana. It didn't do as much damage as it did in Southwest Louisiana, but it still was so strong that it was able to do some damage up in North Louisiana, right in the Ruston area. Delta did the same thing in the Monroe area. And later that season, when Zeta came around New Orleans, it did quite a bit of damage in the New Orleans area and southeast Louisiana. Now, when we talk about Hurricane Laura, it's just a huge disaster relief operation. And I wanted to take a little bit of time today to kind of talk about the total number of staff assigned, all the different things and about all the actions that we did before the storm, or before landfall rather, during landfall, and how our response went from that point. So before landfall, if you look at this graph, and I'm going to try to make it a little bit bigger so everybody can see. You can see here that we're about 6 days from landfall, and we start off with 17 staff that are assigned, which is pretty normal. So 6 days out, we're already having conversations. We go back to that first chart I showed you. There's the tropical disturbance. We're like, all right, this might turn into a thing. We're going to do a disaster relief operation. We're going to start getting some people in theater. We're going to get ready for whatever this could be. So we start off with 17 people. Within a couple of days, 2 days out, a couple of days later, we're up to 130 staff assigned. At that point, we have no shelters open. We have no hotels that we're supporting because our government partners haven't necessarily asked us for support at that point. Just before landfall, we get the call. We're like, hey, come on, we're going to be opening up some. Our partners over at the Department of Children and Family Services says we're going to open up some hotel shelters. We need Red Cross to help us. This is in the height of the pandemic. We were really trying to focus on non-congregate sheltering, not congregate sheltering. We need your help. And we're also possibly going to need to do some congregate sheltering just because we're not going to be able to get enough people in hotels before this thing makes landfall. And that's what Charles kind of talked about earlier about how we were supporting the Repeats Coliseum in Alexandria, Louisiana. We were supporting about 3 or 4 hotels at the time up in Shreveport, Northwest Louisiana. And then you can see here after landfall, it just shoots right up. We're starting to assign hundreds and hundreds of people to the job. We're starting to open up more and more client shelters, supporting more and more client shelters. And we're supporting more and more hotels. And about a week after landfall, we end up getting up to 27 hotels that we're supporting. About 8 days after landfall, we're supporting 4 client shelters. And as we continue on, you can see our peak right here about it's 23 days after landfall. We're up to 42 hotels. And we're at a peak of about 550 people assigned. Which is pretty remarkable. And then we started realizing and trying to be like, all right, we got these 42 hotels. We really need to start consolidating these. And all of these hotels are in New Orleans. They're all across. Learned a lot about the New Orleans hotel industry with this. And we started really working on consolidating those. And I'm going to show you 100 days. You can see here our peak. And then we just start to go down in hotels and we start that consolidation process as people are able to return home. As we're able to just condense into bigger and bigger hotels. And this 100 days out really just demonstrates just how much, even after like 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 days after disaster relief operation, although the tempo did go down, we're still supporting thousands of people in hotel shelter. We still are serving like 500,000 meals a day. We're still supporting them with hundreds of thousands of snacks, 60 days out, 100 days out. And whatnot. It just goes to show you that, even though Hurricane Laura might not have been at the forefront of the media mind or at our minds, there's still a lot of activity going on. And you can even see here, it's outside of the hotel support, outside of the client shelters, even when those ended up dwindling down to just a few, we were then ramping up our recovery efforts, opening up cases, opening up thousands and thousands of cases through this time period. So we just wanted to take a minute to kind of demonstrate just how long a disaster relief operation can be, and just even though we go from the response phase, we then ramp up the recovery and whatnot. So we spent a lot of time talking about what a tropical cyclone is, what is the Red Cross doing when we're looking at all these things, why how much energy we're pouring into ensuring that we're that symbol of safety and really making sure that our hurricane evacuation shelters are safe and everything, preparing. And the reason why we're doing that and why we spend so much time in that is because when you look at the predictions from the National Hurricane Center for 2021, we have a 60% chance of having an above normal year. This is the 3rd year or 4th year in a row of us getting an above normal rating from the National Hurricane Center. According to them, we're going to get between 13 and 20 named storms. That could be anything from a tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane. We're looking at 6 to 10 hurricanes this year and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And a major hurricane is anything that's designated a Category 3 hurricane or higher. And there's a 60% chance this will happen, so very likely that this will happen. Although the National Hurricane Center is the authority, the #1 authority on hurricane predictions, there are some other agencies out there that do a pretty good job with it. And one of them is Colorado State University. Colorado State University has been right on the money the last couple hurricane years with their forecasting and whatnot. And so I'd like to take some time to just kind of go over what they're predicting, which is pretty much in line with exactly what the National Hurricane Center is predicting. They're predicting 18 named storms, 80 days where some part of the United States is under some type of hurricane warning, watch, or cone of air. They're predicting 8 hurricanes, 4 of which would be major, and they're predicting 9 days in which the United States will be under the cone of air or of a major hurricane. So pretty much, when Colorado State University and the National Hurricane Center are pretty much in line, you can see, hey, it's going to be a busy year. And you can see the forecast for 2021 is it's pretty higher. It's much higher than what the average is from 1991 to 2020 was. So it's just very interesting to look at. The interesting thing about the Colorado State University forecast is that they go in a lot more detail than the National Hurricane Center does. And I want to draw everybody's attention to the fact that the Colorado State University is predicting that Louisiana has an 80% chance of having some type of named storm be within 50 miles of its coastline. It's a pretty significant statistical chance. We have a 53% chance for hurricanes being within 50 miles of our coastline, and unfortunately, we have a 23% chance of a major hurricane being within 50 miles of our coastline. These are just statistics, and it really truly only takes one storm to change a whole hurricane season. We have to go into the next hurricane season being like, all right, statistically, very probable we're going to get a named storm, very probable we're going to get a hurricane. And unfortunately, we're the second most at risk of getting a major hurricane within 50 miles of our coastline. And we're looking at that. We know this information, and we're actively working with our workforce to get them ready. We're re-looking at all of our hurricane evacuation shelters. We're working with our government partners because statistically, we're going to have a busy year. Again, the Colorado State University landfall probabilities, which is they're very sophisticated with their stuff. It's pretty cool. You can see the other thing that they do is they look at different parishes on the coastline and what is the probability that a hurricane or a tropical storm or system is going to make landfall there. And you can see here we're really expecting a southeast Louisiana landfall, or potentially that's going to be where the probability is. We got a little bit of a chance, about 43% in the Lake Charles area, which is good because we know that they got hit quite a bit last year. But again, these are just statistics, right? These are just a bunch of computer models doing it. Hurricane science is really more of an art at this point. We're starting to get to the point where it's scientific, but we really wanted to show you all the tools that we're looking at before hurricane season and how we are moving our resources, how we're really ramping up now, getting in preparation for hurricane season because we expect it to impact Louisiana. Wanted to conclude today with just sharing with y'all that we do have some pretty cool apps out there to get the most up-to-date information on hurricanes or where Red Cross shelters are or whatnot. Really encourage you to download the Hurricane app. It's the one here. Just type in ARC apps or Red Cross apps to pop up. They're very helpful. They do give you a heads up when there's a warning. You can look at the emergency app to find the closest shelter, Red Cross shelter that's open, and it'll actually give you cool little directions to it. And these are just really helpful to let your friends and family know that these exist, because if you are in a type of hurricane evacuation or you're evacuating, these apps can really be helpful in really getting you to a safe spot. With that, Rahana,